The storm did not fall. On Kepler 442b, it crashed down like a living predator, howling through the bioluminescent forest with a fury that bent crystalline spires and turned the glowing rain into a curtain of liquid starlight. Captain Ryan Torres pressed himself against the slick trunk of a massive blue-veined tree, his thermal suit straining to shield him from the bone-deep chill. The air was alive with strange harmonics. Thunder rolled in waves that did not simply crack but sang, deep resonant notes that seemed to vibrate in his chest, like the bass line of some alien symphony. He had mapped enough storms to know this one would only intensify, and the flickering orange glow of his emergency tent 50 meters through the shimmering downpour looked like the only chance of survival. He gathered his breath, shifted the pack on his shoulders, and sprinted. The forest floor rippled underfoot, every step splashing through puddles of phosphorescent rain that painted his boots in a soft electric glow. Bioluminescent vines whipped in the gale, and shards of translucent crystal snapped from high growths, clattering to the ground like brittle glass. His visor display flickered as electromagnetic interference spiked, just another gift from Kepler's storm season. Ryan gritted his teeth and pushed forward. His orders had been simple: 3 weeks of survey work, catalog samples, report in. It was the kind of mission designed for solitude and discipline, both of which he had in excess since leaving the service. Yet as he neared the tent, a flash of movement near a jagged cluster of crystal caught his eye. He stopped, chest heaving, squinting through the shimmering rain. At first he thought it was a stray animal, some luminescent crawler trying to shield itself from the storm. But then the figure shifted and lifted its head. She was small, no taller than a child, her thin form huddled against the stone as the wind lashed her. Lavender skin pulsed faintly beneath the rain, bioluminescent light trapped in her trembling frame. Long silver hair clung weightily to her delicate face, plastered by water and streaked with streaks of faint glow. Her suit, or what passed for one, was a body-hugging weave that had clearly failed against the storm, its fibers slick and clinging without warmth. She shivered violently, eyes wide and impossibly bright, amethyst orbs that locked on him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. For a moment Ryan froze, instincts warring inside him. First contact protocol had been drilled into him 100 times. Observe from distance. Record. Avoid interference unless absolutely necessary. But there was nothing theoretical about this. This wasn't a case file. It was a living being dying in front of him. The storm roared louder, a shriek of alien thunder rolling overhead, but Ryan barely heard it over the drum of his own pulse. He raised his hands slowly, palms out, a gesture universal enough. He hoped it would read his peace. "Hey," he called, his voice muffled by the storm, soft but steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." She blinked, lips trembling, and whispered something so faint he almost believed the wind had imagined it. One word, accented but clear: "Please." His chest tightened. That single syllable erased every line of his training. He crossed the last distance quickly, crouched, and gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, light as a child, yet radiating cold like ice. Her skin felt softer than anything he had ever touched, trembling with a fragility that struck through his armor of discipline. Ryan tightened his grip and turned toward the orange glow of his tent. The gale hammered them both, but he moved with grim determination, shielding her as best he could. At the threshold, he triggered the seal, ducking them inside. The sudden warmth hit like a physical blow, the generator's steady hum cocooning them in safety while the storm battered uselessly against the fabric walls. He set her gently on his sleeping roll, pulling the spare thermal blanket from his kit, and wrapped it around her shivering shoulders. For the first time she met his eyes without flinching, the amethyst depths luminous in the soft tent light. "You're safe now," he murmured, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to reassure. And as the trembling eased beneath his hands, Ryan Torres, the man who had sworn to keep his distance from anything beyond his mission, realized he had just crossed a line he could never step back from. The explorer had become a protector, and the stranger he had pulled into his shelter might just alter the course of everything he thought he knew. Inside the tent, the contrast was so sudden it almost disoriented him. The storm's howl softened to a muted roar beyond the insulated walls. The fusion generator's steady hum filling the air with warmth and a faint electric tone. Ryan knelt beside the small alien girl, her lavender skin still trembling under the blanket he had pulled tight around her fragile shoulders. Droplets of glowing rain steamed off her hair, each strand of silver catching the lamplight until she looked less like a storm refugee and more like a fallen star. Her breathing came shallow and quick, chest rising beneath the form-fitting weave that clung uselessly to her. Ryan slipped his pack aside, unclipping a ration tube and pressing it into her long-fingered hands. For a moment she only stared wide-eyed, as if the gesture itself was alien to her. Then she brought it slowly to her lips, and the relief in her face when she swallowed made his throat tighten. He lowered himself cross-legged across from her, giving space, careful not to press. She glanced up, hesitant, and when she spoke, her voice carried a sound like wind chimes stirring in a gentle current. "Thank you." The word was soft but clear, shaped by an accent that wrapped around syllables like flowing water. Ryan blinked. She spoke his language. "You understand me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm, though his mind raced. She nodded faintly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "I am called Kira," she whispered. Her amethyst eyes flickered with something between relief and fear. "I learned your words in secret." The admission made him sit straighter. "Secret?" She dropped her gaze, bioluminescent patterns faintly pulsing along her slender fingers like living tattoos. "My people forbid contact with yours. They say humans are dangerous, impulsive, too violent to trust." But her eyes lifted again, glowing with sincerity. "I have watched you, Ryan Torres. You speak softly to the plants you cut. You carry the small creatures you displace, instead of crushing them. I wanted to know if the kindness was real." His heart stumbled in his chest. The idea that she had been observing him from the forest shadows, that every word he had muttered to himself, every gentle adjustment to a sample had been witnessed, unsettled him in a way that felt both vulnerable and strangely intimate. He rubbed the back of his neck, heat rising in his cheeks despite the cooling suit. "So you've been spying on me?" he managed, his voice carrying a gruffness that was more defense than accusation. "Learning," she corrected, her head tilting in a way that reminded him of an inquisitive bird. "Watching for a chance to meet." Hoping it was true. She shivered again and tucked her knees under the blanket, curling smaller against the warmth. For a long moment Ryan only watched her, caught between the weight of protocol screaming at him to stay detached and the undeniable pull of this fragile, luminous being who had entrusted herself to him. Every inch of her radiated vulnerability, yet there was steel beneath it, the bravery to flee her people's rules, the courage to reveal herself to a human stranger in the heart of a storm. He had seen soldiers half her size break under pressure. But this tiny alien girl? She held his gaze with unflinching, quiet strength. Ryan leaned back against the tent wall, exhaling slowly. "What were you running from, Kira?" he asked finally, his voice softer now, stripped of its defenses. Her fingers tightened around the blanket's edge, the glowing tracers on her skin dimming with remembered pain. "From my fate," she admitted. "They want me bonded to one I do not choose. For advantage, for tradition." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "I believe love should be choice, not chain." The word love lingered in the air like a fragile spark, and Ryan found himself staring at her, as if she had spoken a secret meant only for him. He should have stopped, should have told her that humans had no place in her rebellion, that he could not be the answer to the hunger shining in her eyes. But instead, as the storm sang outside and the warmth pooled between them, he reached into his pack again and pulled free his last spare thermal liner. "Here," he said quietly, leaning just close enough to drape it over her shoulders. She startled at his nearness, then looked up at him through strands of silver hair plastered to her cheeks. Her glow pulsed brighter, resonating faintly with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. And in that soft flickering light, Ryan realized the decision had already been made. He was no longer just a passerby in this storm. He was the shelter she had chosen, and the protector he had become without even meaning to. The storm broke with a reluctant sigh sometime near dawn, its furious chorus fading to a muted dripping rhythm against the orange fabric of the thermal tent. Ryan woke to the weight of silence after chaos, the kind of silence that made the pulse in his ears sound louder than thunder. He shifted carefully, realizing Kira was still curled on his sleeping bag, the thermal blanket pulled to her chin. Her lavender skin glowed faintly in the dim light, patterns of bioluminescence tracing across her cheeks and collarbone like drifting constellations. For a moment, he let himself simply watch her breathe, the rise and fall of her chest as delicate and steady as the hush of rain. Then her eyes opened amethyst wide and startling in the glow, and a small smile curved her lips. "Good morning, Ryan Torres," she whispered, her voice still carrying that fragile wind-chime tone. He returned the smile despite himself. "Morning. How do you feel?" She stretched under the blanket, moving with the grace of a dancer despite her tiny frame, then sat up and tilted her head as if listening to something he couldn't hear. "Better than I should. It is because of you." She hesitated, her gaze flickering across his face, and then her glow brightened slightly. "Your presence calms me. Do humans always do this when they are compatible?" Ryan felt his pulse stumble. "Compatible?" he repeated, trying not to sound rattled. She nodded, long fingers curling over the blanket. "Among my people, when two are meant, their bodies synchronize. Breaths, patterns, even life force. It is rare, but it happens." Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying him as though he were part of a puzzle. "Last night, when you touched me, I felt it. And now," she lifted her hand and set it lightly over his chest, "your heart is following mine." He stiffened at the contact, more from the surge of warmth it sent through him than the words. And then he noticed it, the way her glow pulsed in rhythm, not random, not drifting, but matching the beat thudding beneath his ribs. He swallowed hard, pushing down the rush of awe. "That's not normal for us," he admitted, his voice low. "We call it chemistry when you feel drawn to someone. But this is something else." Her glow dimmed as a shadow crossed her expression. She pulled the blanket tighter, shrinking into herself. "If my guardian finds me, he will see it too. He will know." There was fear now in her voice, sharp and undeniable. Ryan leaned forward, bracing his arms on his knees. "Guardian?" he asked carefully. Her lips pressed into a thin line before she whispered the name like a curse. "Vex. He has been with me since childhood, sworn to ensure I obey the old laws. He can sense me through my patterns. He knows my trail." She trembled once, and forced herself to stillness, the kind of controlled poise Ryan recognized from soldiers before battle. "If he finds me here with you, he will call it contamination. You will be marked as threat. He will not hesitate." Ryan's instincts, honed over years of combat and survival, snapped to readiness. He could almost hear the words of protocol in his mind. Disengage, retreat, return to mission. But looking at Kira, her fragile form glowing in sync with his own heartbeat, He knew that path was already closed. "So what do we do?" he asked, steady but quiet. She lifted her chin, and for the first time he saw steel beneath the fragility, a determination that made her look older than her years. "There is one way," she said, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that rooted him to the spot. "A ritual. If we bond, Vex cannot touch us. By our laws, he must yield." Ryan felt the weight of those words, heavy as the storm outside. "Bond?" he repeated. "What does that mean?" Her fingers glowed brighter, trembling slightly as she reached for his hand. "It means our lives would no longer be separate. We would share thoughts, strength, even death. One falls, the other follows. Forever." Her voice broke softly, though her gaze never wavered. "It is dangerous. But without it, you will not survive him." For a moment, the tent seemed too small to contain the enormity of the choice. Ryan's heart hammered in time with her glow, each beat pressing the reality closer. The storm outside had ended, but another storm was already moving toward them, carried in the name Vex, and as Kira's hand hovered inches from his, Ryan knew he stood at the edge of a decision that could shatter every rule he had ever followed. The protector in him said to let her go, to keep her safe from his world. But the man who had held her through the night, who had felt her heartbeat become his own, whispered another truth. He could not let her face this alone. The storm had left the jungle glittering like a cathedral of glass, every leaf and crystal shard heavy with bioluminescent droplets that caught the newborn light. Ryan and Kira moved together through the dripping silence, the weight of her words about the bond hanging between them heavier than his pack. He could feel her pulse through the light grip she kept on his arm, a rhythm that matched his own in a way both unsettling and impossible to ignore. They reached a clearing where shattered spires lay scattered like broken mirrors, and for a fleeting moment he thought the danger had passed, that perhaps Vex was only a shadow in her fears. But then the ground trembled, branches snapped in the distance, and a low, resonant call rolled through the trees like the bellow of a predator marking its kill. Kiara froze, every trace of color in her glow dimming to a fearful hush. "He is here," she whispered, and even her voice trembled. Ryan shifted instinctively, pulling her behind him as movement rippled through the crystalline undergrowth. The sound grew, deliberate and heavy, until the figure emerged, a towering silhouette more nightmare than man. Vex strode into the clearing with the authority of inevitability, 8 feet of dark muscle laced with angular bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in time with his fury. His eyes glowed molten gold, locking on Kira with something between possession and betrayal, then sliding to Ryan with pure, unfiltered contempt. "Kira," his voice boomed, the sound carrying like a hammer strike through the clearing. "Step away from the primitive, now." Kira tightened her grip on Ryan's arm, her small body trembling but rooted in place. "No," she said, her voice fragile but unwavering. "I will not return." The Guardian's features hardened, bone ridges casting deep shadows over his face. He raised an arm, and a weapon unfolded from it with a sharp hum, light crackling at its core, technology centuries beyond human understanding. Ryan's training snapped into place, adrenaline sharpening every detail, every angle of cover, every line of retreat, but he didn't step back. Instead, he planted himself squarely in front of Kira, sidearm drawn, though it looked pitiful against the alien weapon. "You'll go through me," he said quietly, the kind of quiet that carried conviction. Vex's golden eyes narrowed. "Then you will die for her mistake." The first blast seared past him, shattering a crystal column into shards of light. Ryan dove, pulling Kira with him, rolling to cover behind a jagged outcrop. His pistol barked in response, the sound small but sharp, the round sparking harmlessly against Vex's shield. The Guardian advanced, every step measured, unhurried, unstoppable. Ryan felt the heat of another blast scorch past, the shockwave rattling his teeth. But then something shifted. Kira's glow flared bright, her hand clutching his, and suddenly his movements weren't his alone. They moved together, not with practice, but with instinct, her speed guiding his angles, his discipline anchoring her strikes. She darted from behind cover, impossibly fast, striking at pressure points along Vex's armored frame with glowing fingers that left the giant staggering. Ryan followed her rhythm, firing not at the shield, but at the ground. Ricochets kicking up shards that blinded their foe just long enough for Kira to slip past and knock the weapon from his grasp with a crack of light. The fight spiraled into chaos, blasts scorching trees, Ryan ducking and weaving with military precision, Kira flickering like lightning itself as her patterns pulsed brighter with every strike. They were two against one, yet it felt like one against one, their movements harmonized by something deeper than coordination. When Ryan ducked, Kira struck. When she faltered, his hand steadied her. The bond that had begun as a whisper inside the tent roared now like fire in their veins, lending them strength neither could have summoned alone. At last, with a combined surge, they drove Vex to his knees, his weapon disabled, his golden eyes burning with rage and something else, something almost like reluctant recognition. He glared up at them, chest heaving, the glow of his patterns sputtering like a dying ember. "This is not over," he growled. "The council will hear of this blasphemy. They will send others." Kira stepped forward, small but radiant, her glow blazing with defiance as she lifted her chin. "Then let them come," she declared, her voice ringing through the shattered clearing. "We are bonded now, and by law you cannot break it." Her hand found Ryan's, and the moment their fingers laced together, their glow flared into perfect synchrony, light pulsing across both their bodies in waves that lit the jungle like dawn. Ryan looked down at their joined hands, feeling her heartbeat as if it were his own, and knew with unshakable certainty that a line had been crossed. Whatever came next, councils, battles, judgment, there was no turning back. They were one now, bound by choice, by defiance, and by a love that had ignited in the heart of a storm. 3 days after the fight in the clearing, the jungle no longer felt like Ryan's quiet domain of study, but a place suspended in uneasy expectation, the air heavy with the promise of judgment. The story of what had happened spread faster than either of them could have imagined, through human channels, through alien whispers, and now the clearing where Vex had fallen to his knees had been transformed into something that looked unnervingly like a tribunal ground. Human envoys had arrived, their portable outposts flashing with antennae and lights, while from the sky a vessel of intricate design had descended, its hull inscribed with glowing lines that pulsed like veins of living metal. Kira stood beside Ryan at the edge of the assembly, her hand wound tightly through his, her glow muted but steady. He could feel her fear and her determination bleeding through their connection, a resonance that had only deepened since the moment their pulses synchronized. When the ship's hatch opened and the alien delegation emerged, the atmosphere shifted as though the jungle itself held its breath. At their head walked Elder Zephyr, her silver patterns dim with age, yet still luminous with authority. Her every step carried the weight of centuries, and her eyes, ancient and unyielding, swept across the gathering before settling on Kira with something between sorrow and calculation. Behind her strode 2 counselors, both younger but radiating hostility. Drex, his crimson tracers pulsing like a warning flare, watched Ryan as one might a contaminant in need of purging. Trax, broader and sharper featured, held himself like a weapon barely leashed, his blue glow spiking whenever he glanced at Kira, and behind them, under human guard but unbowed, stood Vex, his golden glare fixed on Ryan with the simmering intensity of a predator robbed of its prey. The assembly began without ceremony. Drex's voice cracked across the clearing like a blade. "This bond is an abomination. It must be severed before it festers further." His words drew murmurs from both sides, human and alien alike. Ryan stood taller, shoulders squared, the calm he had honed in battle anchoring him against the hostility pressing in. "With respect," he said, his voice carrying steady across the silence, "you're judging on fear, not fact. In 3 days, Kira and I have achieved what months of negotiation have failed to accomplish. We've found a way to exist together." Drex's glow flared angrily. "Your kind are primitive animals, ruled by impulse. That you ensnared one of ours proves nothing except your corruption." Kira stepped forward, and Ryan felt her resolve like a flare inside his chest. "He did not ensnare me," she said, her voice strong despite her size. I chose him because he is kind, because he sees me not as a tool of law or politics, but as a person. Can you say the same of the mate you tried to force upon me?" The words fell like stones into water, ripples of shock moving through the assembly. Elder Zephyr raised a hand, her patterns glowing faintly. "Words are air," she said, her tone deliberate. "But the bond, if it is true, cannot be denied. There is one way to prove it beyond doubt." Her gaze fixed on them both, ancient and piercing. "The trial of souls." The phrase hung in the air like thunder. Even Vex's golden eyes flickered at the weight of it. Ryan frowned. "What does that mean?" Elder Zephyr's voice softened, though it lost none of its gravity. "A test older than any council. It does not measure affection or desire. It measures the root of two beings' essence, the compatibility of their very life force. If what you claim is true, you will survive it. If not—" Her pause was a sentence in itself. Kira's hand squeezed Ryan's tighter, fear and courage burning through their bond. "We accept," she said before he could answer. Ryan turned to her, startled, but when he saw the fierce defiance in her eyes, he felt his hesitation dissolve. He nodded once. "We'll take your trial." The ritual began as twilight fell, the council forming a ring around them, humans watching uneasily at the edge. Elder Zephyr produced an ancient device, crystalline and alive with flowing light, which she placed on the ground between them. As its energy built, Ryan felt a tug in his chest, like invisible hands pulling his soul apart, stripping down his being until every memory, every fear, every hidden truth was laid bare. Pain lanced through him, not physical but existential, the terror of being unmade. Through the haze, he felt Kira breaking beside him, her glow flickering, her thoughts scattering into panic. And then, through the bond, he felt her reaching for him. Not with hands, but with everything she was. He let his walls fall, opening himself completely, and their consciousnesses collided with the force of merging rivers. His wonder at her beauty, his determination to shield her, his loneliness before her, all of it flowed into her. And in return he felt her awe at his compassion, her longing to choose her own path, her fierce love blooming like fire in the dark. The energy of the trial surged higher, threatening to tear them apart, but instead it fused them tighter. Their bioluminescent patterns blazed in unison, creating new colors neither species had ever displayed, hues that rippled like auroras across their joined forms. When the energy finally dimmed and silence fell over the clearing, they were still standing still, holding each other. Ryan's breath came ragged, but his eyes were locked on Kira's, their bond now undeniable, unbreakable, alive with something larger than either of them. The council watched in stunned silence, the impossible proof shining before them. Elder Zephyr's expression softened into something that might have been awe. "The prophecy of convergence," she whispered. "It is real." And in that moment, Ryan knew the fight was no longer for survival. It was for the future of two civilizations bound together by what had just been proven undeniable. the jungle clearing lay, hushed beneath the weight of revelation, its crystalline towers dripping with rainlight, as though the storm itself was listening. Ryan stood with Kira's small hand clasped in his, their glow synchronized and pulsing in waves that shimmered through the twilight. They were exhausted from the trial, their bodies trembling with the strain of having been pulled apart and reforged, yet neither released the other. Around them, silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of alien devices and the uneasy shifting of human envoys watching history bend. Elder Zephyr's gaze lingered on them, her ancient eyes unreadable, while the younger counselors radiated hostility, barely held in check. Drex was first to speak, his crimson tracers flaring with venom. "This does not change what he is," he hissed, pointing a sharp-fingered hand at Ryan. "A human impulsive, corruptible, temporary. Whatever resonance the trial showed, it cannot justify contaminating our bloodlines." Trax added his voice, sharper and crueler. "Better to sever them both than risk what this hybrid union might create." Kira's glow dimmed in sorrow, but Ryan felt her fury through their bond like heat across his skin. He squeezed her hand, grounding her, then lifted his chin. "You call me primitive," he said, his voice carrying with steady force. "But what happened here proves otherwise. Your own trial showed that together we're stronger than apart. If you can't see that, then your fear blinds you." He expected their glares, their mutters. But what he did not expect was the way Elder Zephyr leaned closer, her silver tracers pulsing faintly, as if catching some rhythm only she could hear. "Look closer," she murmured, and in her voice was not accusation but wonder. Ryan frowned, uncertain, until he felt Kira stiffen at his side. She turned to him slowly, her amethyst eyes widening in astonishment. "Your skin," she whispered. He glanced down and froze. Lines of light were pulsing faintly beneath his own flesh, delicate traceries glowing through his veins, colors that matched Kira's patterns, but wove into his human frame as if they had always belonged. The glow climbed his arms, crawled across his chest, shimmered even in the breath, clouding the night air. His hands trembled as he stared. "What the hell?" he began, but Kira touched his cheek, her glow intertwining with his, and he felt it. Not just light, but life. His body was changing. His senses sharpened until he could feel the hum of the planet itself, hear the faint crackle of energy beneath every crystalline surface. His heartbeat, once steady and separate, now moved in seamless tandem with hers, their rhythms indistinguishable. Gasps rippled through the assembly, disbelief colliding with awe. Elder Zephyr's patterns flared bright, the light of revelation, while Drex stumbled back a step, his fury momentarily stripped into something rawer. Fear. "Impossible," he rasped. "Humans cannot bear the bond." Trax's voice shook with anger and denial. "He is mutating. Abomination." But Kira's expression glowed with wonder as her fingers traced the light beneath Ryan's skin. "Not abomination," she said softly, her voice carrying into the silence. "Convergence." The word landed like thunder. Elder Zephyr bowed her head, acknowledging the prophecy her people had carried in whispers for centuries. "The union foretold," she said. "Two become more than either was. A bridge between our kind." Her voice thickened with awe. "It has happened." Drex's patterns flared crimson, his voice breaking with desperation. "If we allow this, everything changes our laws, our bloodlines, our very identity." Ryan stepped forward, his glow casting back the shadows of doubt, his hand still steady on Kira's. Maybe that's the point. Maybe it's time everything does change. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with history bending. Vex, bound under guard, stared at them with golden eyes stripped of rage. For the first time, Ryan thought he saw not hatred, but reluctant recognition. The Guardian bowed his head, voice low and rough. "You have done what none believed possible. If this is destiny, then I was its instrument, though I fought it." The admission silenced even Drex's fury. As night fell, the clearings shimmered with their joined glow, painting the jungle in auroras of color no eye had seen before. Humans and aliens alike stared, their disbelief slowly giving way to the knowledge that something had been born here that could not be undone. Ryan held Kira close, her warmth steady against his chest, and felt not just her heartbeat, but his own stretched into hers, their lives twined like roots of the same tree. He thought back to that first night in the tent, when all he had meant to offer was shelter from a storm, and marveled at what it had become. He had not only saved her, he had found her, and in doing so, changed the course of two worlds. Kira's voice rose softly, meant for him but carried into the night. "We are not two anymore, Ryan Torres. We are one, and no storm will ever unmake us." And as the jungle pulsed in resonance with their glow, Ryan realized the final truth of the prophecy. The storm had not come to kill him. It had come to bring him her.